I knew something was wrong the moment the water stopped moving. For years, a narrow creek ran behind my property. Nothing fancy, just a steady, quiet flow that handled rainwater, snowmelt, and kept the land from flooding. It had been there long before the neighborhood, long before the HOA, long before any of us showed up. Then one morning after a heavy rain, it was silent. No flow, no movement, just a shallow pool where the water used to pass through. At first I thought it was debris, fallen branches, mud, something temporary. It wasn't. Before we go any further, if you enjoy HOA stories where entitlement runs straight into real consequences, hit like and subscribe right now. You're watching Karen's Stories Daily, and this one gets wild fast. I walked downstream to see what was going on. That's when I found it. Concrete. Fresh. Gray. Poured straight across the creek like someone decided water should just stop. No culvert. No drainage pipe. No permit notice. Just a solid concrete wall blocking a natural waterway. I stood there staring at it, trying to process how anyone thought this was okay. Turns out the HOA did. A few months earlier, the neighborhood downhill from me had complained about soggy lawns, standing water after storms. Instead of consulting an engineer or the county, the HOA decided to fix the problem themselves. Their solution? Block the creek upstream. They said it was erosion control. They said it was temporary. They said it was on HOA-managed land, so it wasn't my concern. Except it was, because that creek didn't belong to them. It was a natural drainage channel mapped by the county. And when you block a creek, the water doesn't disappear, it backs up. Within days, my backyard started holding water. The soil turned soft. Mosquitoes showed up. After the next rain, parts of the yard stayed flooded for days. I contacted the HOA. Their response was exactly what you'd expect. They told me the work was approved internally. They said I should be patient. They suggested the flooding was natural. One board member actually told me water finds its level. Yeah, it does, and it was finding my property. I asked for permits. They ignored that question. I asked who engineered the solution. Silence. I asked whether the county had been notified. That's when they got defensive. They warned me not to interfere with HOA infrastructure. They said removal of the concrete would be a violation. They even hinted at fines if I caused trouble. That was their mistake. Because while HOAs love pretending they have authority over everything, they don't outrank environmental law. So I made one call. Not to a lawyer. Not to the HOA. To the county environmental office. I explained the situation calmly. Blocked creek. Concrete fill. Flooding upstream. No visible permits. There was a pause on the phone. Then the guy said, "Can you email photos?" I sent them immediately. The next day, I got a reply. They were sending an inspector. The inspector showed up 2 days later, early in the morning, wearing boots and carrying a tablet. He didn't start by talking. He started by walking. Along the creek, through my backyard, then downstream toward the concrete wall the HOA had poured. He stopped in front of it and just stared for a few seconds. Then he sighed. He asked me one simple question. When was this installed? I told him everything. The complaints, the HOA emails, the threats. The flooding that started immediately after the concrete went in. I showed him photos from before, when the water flowed freely. I showed him messages where the HOA claimed it was temporary erosion control. He nodded and took notes. Then he crouched down, touched the water, and pointed out things I hadn't even noticed yet. Saturated soil spreading sideways. Vegetation that was starting to change. Water pooling where it never used to. He explained that when you block a natural drainage channel, you don't just cause a flood. You change how the land behaves. He told me something that made my stomach drop. Because of how long the water had been sitting, and because of the soil type in our area, the land was already starting to meet the criteria for a regulated wetland. That word hit hard. Wetland. I didn't fully understand what that meant yet, but I could tell from his tone that it was serious. He explained that once an area is classified as a wetland, everything changes. Building restrictions, maintenance rules, environmental protections, federal oversight, And if the HOA caused it, the liability would be massive. He documented everything: measurements, photos, water depth, flow blockage. He flagged the concrete structure as an unauthorized obstruction in a mapped drainage way. Then he asked for the HOA's permit number. I told him they didn't have one. He raised his eyebrows and said, "That's going to be a problem." Within a week, letters went out. Not just to me, to the HOA board, to the management company, to the county planning department, to the state environmental office. Suddenly, the HOA stopped ignoring me. They emailed asking for a meeting. Their tone had completely changed. No more threats, no more fines. Just let's talk, and we want to resolve this quickly. At the meeting, they tried to downplay it, said they didn't realize the creek was protected, said they thought it was just a ditch, said they were acting in the neighborhood's best interest. The inspector wasn't buying it. He explained, calmly and clearly, that ignorance doesn't override environmental law. The creek was documented. The blockage altered water flow. The flooding created conditions consistent with wetland development, and until it was resolved properly, the area would remain under review. One board member asked the question everyone was thinking. "So, what happens now?" The inspector said something I'll never forget. "Now, you don't touch anything, and we assess." That's when the panic set in, because assessment takes time. And during that time, the water stayed. The soil stayed saturated. Plants adapted. Wildlife showed up: frogs, birds, things that love wetlands. Neighbors started noticing. Lawns downhill dried out. Lawns uphill turned into marshy patches. People started complaining, not to me, to the HOA. And for the first time, the HOA realized they couldn't bully their way out of this. By the time the final inspection happened, the neighborhood already felt different. The water hadn't gone anywhere. In fact, it had settled in. What used to be soft grass was now spongy ground. Small pools formed naturally after rain and didn't drain the way they used to. Plants that normally showed up near streams were growing farther out than before. Birds started landing there regularly. Frogs showed up at night. All signs the inspectors pay close attention to. The HOA couldn't rush it. They couldn't drain it. They couldn't remove the concrete. They were under a stop work order. Every move now required approval, and approvals take time. When the county and state inspectors returned together, it wasn't casual anymore. This wasn't just one guy with a clipboard. It was multiple agencies, measurements, soil samples, and official documentation. They walked the area slowly, marking boundaries, testing saturation, identifying vegetation. The HOA board followed them around in silence. A few days later, the determination came in writing. The area upstream of the blockage now met the criteria for a regulated wetland. That meant protections kicked in automatically. No filling, no building, no modification without permits that are notoriously difficult to get. The HOA's temporary fix had permanently changed the land's classification, and because they caused it, the responsibility was theirs. They were ordered to remove the concrete obstruction, but not immediately. Removal itself now required an approved remediation plan to avoid further damage. Environmental engineers had to be hired. Impact studies had to be done. Timelines stretched from weeks into months. Meanwhile, the wetland designation stayed. That affected property values, yard usage, drainage plans, even future construction approvals. Homeowners started asking questions, loud ones. At the next HOA meeting, people weren't complaining about grass height or trash cans. They were asking why their backyards were suddenly protected land, why they couldn't install fences, why insurance companies were asking about flood risk. The HOA tried to explain, tried to shift blame, tried to say they were acting in good faith. But good faith doesn't undo concrete. In the end, the HOA paid for everything: engineers, consultants, fines, remediation costs, legal fees. They had to update their bylaws to prohibit any alteration of natural waterways without government approval. The board members responsible quietly stepped down over the next year. The creek eventually flowed again, through a properly engineered channel approved by the county, but the wetland designation didn't fully go away. Part of the area remained protected permanently, and the neighborhood had to live with it. As for me, my property dried out slowly, not all at once. Over time, the land healed, but the lesson stayed. HOAs love control, but nature doesn't care about clipboards or meetings, and environmental law doesn't bend for convenience. If you've ever seen an HOA make a decision that ignored common sense and paid for it later, drop your story in the comments. And if this one surprised you, share it with someone who thinks concrete fixes everything. This is Karen Stories Daily. And sometimes one inspection is all it takes to turn entitlement into a permanent reminder.